Welcome back to the Pastor's Podcast. Pastor Scott here with Pastor Brian.
Hey.
And Adam Vaughn.
Hello.
Usually in front of the microphone? I was going to say behind the microphone, but isn't behind the microphone like where you are now?
I guess.
Does it work like, okay, so here's my question. Does it work like a camera? Like, are you either in front of the camera or behind the camera? Is it the same as microphones?
Usually I'm in front of a computer screen with headphones on listening to this instead of speaking into the mic on the podcast.
Yeah, I was trying to find the short way to say that. and I couldn't. It didn't come. It didn't. But Adam, who is off, who basically is producing all of our, it actually has since
2020, I think.
Since the beginning of the Pastor's Podcast?
No, I took over. I think Kristen was doing it first.
Oh, okay.
And then I took over after a couple months.
Yeah. So for the vast majority of the history of the Pastor's Podcast, is this the first time? I can't remember. Is this the first time you're on the podcast, though?
Yes.
It is.
How many times have you been tempted to insert yourself into the podcast while you were listening?
Well, at least a couple times. There have been a few times, for those who are the avid listeners, they'll know the times that I added sound effects and song snippets. So that could be a form of me adding myself.
That's true. Well, I'm glad you've like come prepared because you're wearing a T-shirt with a soundboard on it.
Yes, I am.
The imprint of a soundboard. So it just looks very. So here we are to talk about the topic of technology in West LA. We're continuing our theme of our podcast series on wisdom for life in West LA, and one of the topics for wisdom in life in West LA that we are needing to address constantly, that I think everybody is the topic of technology. That's a pretty broad topic there, but it manifests itself in a lot of different ways. And Adam, as someone who's both, thought about this, care about you, led our book discussion through Power Failure on topic of technology. What was that, a year ago now?
I think so.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And so we invited Adam to be, and Brian's got all this figured out. And so basically Brian's going to like tell us the right answers. And then Adam's going to put it into, our basic context. And I'm just going to ask the questions. We'll figure out. I think that's
how we do it most of the time.
Goes. That's right.
So avid listeners will know.
So, as I mentioned, technology is a pretty broad topic. So maybe why don't we start with just thinking through some of the different ways people are engaging with technology in West LA in ways that would necessitate an understanding of biblical principles and how Scripture speaks to it. Where would we start?
Well, in the questions that you sent prior to the interview, you gave 4 categories.
Mm-hmm.
One of which was etc.
Yeah, does that count?
But there was work, social, and entertainment, and I think those are the 3 main categories, and then etc. would be a good catch-all for anything else. So,
I couldn't think beyond 3, so I put etc. There's probably something I'm not thinking of.
3 points is a good number.
Yeah, I actually under etc. I thought of the spiritual realm, where we live stream church, we have virtual church, things like that. There's also the Bible app. Even technically the chapters and verses in the Bible are a form of technology that helps us find exactly what we need to in Scripture. Technology doesn't have to be electronics. It's just anything that makes life a little bit easier. Within work, I thought of like email, Slack, Dropbox. Like we have international coworkers now because of working from home and remote work. So you also have Zoom, where you only see your coworkers on a computer screen. Then obviously social media. I've had people that I meet for the first time where instead of asking for my phone number, they say, "What's your Instagram?" And I go, "I don't have Instagram." And then the conversation usually ends.
Harper literally got Instagram to like go to college orientation because he was warned about this.
Wow.
He's like, I'm not going to be able to like connect with anybody if so yeah.
Yeah.
And then I followed him, and he hasn't posted anything.
Nice.
So, and I had to like re-engage my account because I wanted to follow my son. So I don't. He's probably got some like burner account where he like actually posts, and the one that his dad doesn't follow him or something.
Oh, what
Do
are
they call
those
those burners?
called?
What are those?
No,
Those aren't
they're-
called burners. What are those called?
There's a name for it.
Somebody's screaming into
I
their
forget.
car right now.
Yeah.
Like the name. They're like, I can't believe you can't come. Anyways, so yeah, okay, so
Yeah, and then in entertainment, you have movies, streaming, video games, Spotify, sports and concerts also have a ton of technology in them. Yeah, I also thought about like even just getting to the entertainment takes a lot of technology. You're either going to drive or maybe take the bus or the metro, ride a bike if you're adventurous. And then even if you take the bus, you need a tap card or your cell phone. All the tickets for everything is through your cell phone now. Even if you have the technology of a printer and print off your tickets, that's kind of an outdated form of getting your tickets nowadays.
yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of technology on top of technology. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
That's the weird thing about technology is that when we say that word, we only think about the most recent innovations, the things that feel like they've changed. But essentially, it's all technology all the way down in a sense. Like your books are a kind of technology. The printing press was a revolutionary technology. Cars are technology. But we tend to think about the most recent changes in like advancements, innovation, ways of taking the world and assembling it to make our lives easier, more convenient, or more powerful in some way. And so when you think about it that way, you realize, exactly how much of your life is, the way your life exists is mediated through or built on some kind of technology without which so much would change.
So in this sense, we're basically saying like the wheel is technology,
Yeah.
right?
Fire.
Technology. What does that count? Because was it like created? Does it have to be created to be? Does that have to be like made to be technology? Is that?
If you quibble, it could be like
I don't know.
Kindle or something, or kindling.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
I don't know.
Anyways, all right. Sorry.
One rock against another. And I don't know.
All right. So which raises the question though. Then, like, are there ethical questions in this at all? Then, like, is technology good or bad? Like, how do we? If it is, and in that sense, if it's everything, like how do we think about it?
Well, it's not good or bad the way we think, the way that people are. In one sense, like good or bad, like morally, you kind of, at some level, you can really only talk about good or bad agents, good or bad people, good or bad. People can make good decisions or bad decisions. They can make moral choices that are good or bad, right or wrong. In that sense, technology can't like make any decisions on its own that are good or bad. In that sense, it's morally neutral. But also, the way you use technology as a moral agent is going to either, like, typically because technology makes things easier, it's either going to increase the power, the potency of something good or something bad. And so if you make a bad choice with technology, that bad can get really bad. And to make a good choice, that choice can sometimes get really good. But the other thing I'd want to say, and I think Adam will speak to this to some degree too, is that doesn't mean that technology is just this kind of bland, neutral material that you get to use as you see fit. Technology also uses you. And so when you think about how much of your life is built on, say, what's a good example? The car. So the car is a revolutionary technology. Our cities, the entire structure of our life, where grocery stores are and how you get food and all sorts of other things. I mean, there's so much about your life that couldn't be the same without the car. And that means that the car wasn't just a neutral thing. It shaped your life as much as your use of it shapes the world. So the existence of that technology shapes the world as much as your use of it can shape the world. So in a very strange way, technology actually does stuff to us. TV is the classic example. And social media these days is a much stronger example in this way of how a way of being entertained where you're a little more active of a participant, where you're standing, like in the Globe Theatre, in England, watching a Shakespeare play, where there's a presence there that's just different. TV, by virtue of being the kind of entertainment it is, makes you passive. It makes you receptive. And in a sense, is that like horrible and wrong? Well, I don't know. There's all sorts of ways we could talk about that, but it's not as though it's nothing. It's not as though it doesn't shape your experience and therefore shape who you are too by using it.
Okay, so I think it's really helpful because I think the temptation, I know that I feel a temptation to either kind of evaluate technology as good or bad, right? Like, oh, it's helpful, or it's bad and just should be avoided because, it produces all these problems. Or to on the other extreme, to just see it as completely ethically neutral, right? Like it doesn't. The only thing that matters is what I do with it. And what I hear you saying is that it's more complex than that. So what are the ethical considerations or the ethical questions that maybe not, what are some of the, I won't put you into that box, what are the top two, but what are some of the ethical questions that we should bring to our consideration of our use of various technologies, of the advent of new, historically new technologies?
Yeah, so I think the baseline question that I ask myself with any technology is, what is this freeing me from? And is it freeing me from something I shouldn't be free from? Like, is this making my life easier from something that really shouldn't be an easy part of life? So an example would be like with virtual church, like, oh, I think it should take some sort of effort from me to participate in my church service. So if I'm fully capable of just waking up a few minutes earlier and getting to church on time, I should do that instead of thinking like, oh, well, I'll just sleep in and watch the live stream or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's probably the most black and white, like, oh yeah, this is an easy call based on
this
that.
is freeing me something that I shouldn't be freed from.
Exactly.
So it is freeing me from something, but it's not necessarily something I should be freed from. That's a great first question. It's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the big ones. I think that gets down into kind of the root of the issue with technology is just because you can doesn't always mean you should. And that's a very complicated question. Like it's not simple. How do you figure out what you should be freed from? And that's hard. And it's not as though there's a clean answer to every question for every person and every technology. Nevertheless, and this is where the good and bad kind of falls apart. Moral categories like good and bad, right and wrong, aren't necessarily the way we're talking right now. We're talking much more in prudential, like wisdom categories. What does it mean to be a faithful human being in the world, as opposed to like thou shalt and thou shalt not? Mm-hmm. And that's obviously just harder. The wisdom literature is harder. You put Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and all that together, and it's just more complicated than the Ten Commandments in a certain sense. And so what we're doing here in saying what should we be freed from and what shouldn't we be freed from, that gets you into all sorts of difficult territory that our culture doesn't have a lot of equipment to talk about. So for us, if you can be freed from it, you should be. It's sort of a natural, like the question itself doesn't make a ton of sense. Like, well, I should have the choice to opt in or opt out of pretty much anything. And so therefore, if technology can free me from it, then I should avail myself of that if I choose to. So it just comes down to my own consent as to what I want to do. And what Adam's question gets to, which is, I think, the very important part, is there's a part of being human that involves friction. It involves difficulty. It involves constraint to others. Love is, we talked about this a few Sundays ago, love is sacrifice. Love means being tethered to the other. It means not being free. Actual love sometimes looks like doing difficult things, and being freed from those things wouldn't just get rid of the difficulty, it would get rid of the love. And so that same thing is true for being a human. Being a human involves things like presence. And so there's questions about, hard questions about, should I be freed from the ability to have friendships that are only in person? Like, is it good to be freed from the need to be face to face with someone in my relationship with them? Obviously, that's super complicated. There's layers to that, and what that does and doesn't mean. But those are, I think, the kind of ethical questions that we're asking that are alongside bigger, broader ethical questions, like, is this technology going to end up being more harmful than helpful? Even though helpfulness isn't always the only metric, there are certain questions about the atomic bomb have gone along those lines, right? It's like, okay, here's something we can do. Is it going to be better for the world or worse for the world? It's very difficult to figure out how to answer as finite human beings, but that's another question that you have to kind of deal with, both in that macro level and also in your own life. You think about all the studies on social media and what it's done to mental health issues and teenagers that have come out recently, and you start to ask the question, okay, has this freedom from the need to be on location, has that helped more or hurt more? Now, how do you answer that? I'm not entirely sure. That's not my area of expertise by any stretch. So I'm not looking to speak into something that's not my field. But I do know that that's a decent question to ask. So what we're being freed from and what we're being freed to, and then how much harm versus help is that actually causing to human beings and to society, beyond even just my own personal life and ability to kind of live without constraint?
And I think that's actually a good point. What we're being freed from and what we're being freed to, technology doesn't really tell us what we're being freed to. It just says, now you're free from this. You have a dishwasher, so now you're free from having to wash the dishes every night. But it doesn't tell you, so now with that extra 15, 20 minutes, here's what you should do. It just says, here you go.
Yeah.
It's up to you.
Yeah. So, I mean, man, there's so many layers in this. And I think that's so, related to that is also like what I'm utilizing the technology for, right? So are utilizing, and because it can magnify good, it can magnify blessing, it can magnify just kind of neutral wisdom actions, and it can also magnify sin, right? It can also perpetuate or facilitate sin, and so obviously there's ethics there, but also those aren't the only ethical questions, right? There's what is this freeing me from? There's what is this freeing me to? I really like even the question of, is this more harmful or helpful? Even maybe related to that or just behind that is just the evaluation of the cost at all, right? That all technology has a cost, that it frees us from something, but in a sense, it doesn't do it free, right? And you're like, well, wait, what about the wheel? Like the wheel gets me from here to there quicker. With less energy, with like, I can go down the hill. I can go quicker. It's more fun. But there's also a cost, right? I lose the experience of walking slowly down the hill, right? And so maybe even if I'm like, well, gosh, the benefits far outweigh the cost, even though I think sometimes when we assume that the benefits far outweigh the cost, we don't think about the cost, or we don't consider that there is a cost or what the ramifications might be, what the maybe unknown or unseen at the moment ramifications might be of that cost.
Well, just doing that kind of cost benefit isn't just theoretical, because at some point, if you do that about the wheel, for example, every once in a while, you're going to walk slowly down the hill just because you have the time and you know the benefits of it because you were intentional about your use of technology. I think that's what I've actually learned a lot from Adam personally on this issue. He's got really good thoughts on this. One of the reasons on the podcast. But one of the things that is fascinating about technology, and I think the reason that we've talked about it so much, is because on the one hand, I'm really bullish on it. So many less people have died of starvation because of technology. Like there are massive upsides to the things that have happened scientifically, technologically over the last even 50 years. And yet at the same time, we often sound not very bullish on technology because of how little attention has been paid to that cost benefit and to the idea that it's just so obvious that we should keep doing everything we can technologically, that there's a way that all that benefit can actually come at a larger cost than it had to if we had just slowed down and said, hold on, what is this doing to us along the way? How can we focus on the things that really are helpful and also see the things we're losing and maybe try and compensate for that, even if we choose to go forward in these various areas?
Okay, so one of the other questions, and you brought it up earlier, and before we kind of move on to some biblical principles and stuff like that, is also the ethical question of how the technology, maybe any new technology, but how it's forming us. I feel like it's a whole nother, that's not just like a cost benefit evaluation. It's not just a, what am I doing with the freed capacity, time, energy, resources that I have. That's not like, am I using it for good or using it for evil? But there's this whole other almost dimension to technology wherein the use of it forms us. And there's an ethical question there. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I think there's a great little book. I forgot the title. Justin Whitmer Early wrote it. It's gotten somewhat popular. It's about essentially like liturgies and habits of the heart or something like that. No, that's Robert Bella. Anyway,
Habits of the Household.
Habits of the Household. And I think he has an earlier one as well. And what he does is he just kind of talks a lot about how the things you do every day aren't just choices you make that go out into the world, but they're actually choices that end up kind of turning back and shaping you. So one example he'll use is if every morning you get up and the first thing you do is check your email. On the one hand, all you're doing is getting up, grabbing your phone and looking at email. So, but there's a way that actually trains you to some degree. Maybe you'd use the word unconsciously, or at least like not very directly, but it trains you to think that waking up in the morning, what you exist to do is essentially like field these things. It puts you in a frame of mind. It adjusts how you think about your day. And eventually over time, there's a way that, to put it a little too strongly, like the cement begins to dry on those kind of perspectives on yourself and the world. He has a bunch of others like that. If you constantly stay up later than you should, and you end up waking up earlier in the morning, it's like you're just kind of teaching yourself in doing that you don't have constraints, that you don't need to worry about the future, that you don't need to worry about the consequences of your actions. That sounds so overblown, unless you're someone who's actually done that a bunch, and you kind of look back over your life and you go, these liturgies, essentially, these things that we do over and over and over again, aren't just things that are happening out there. They're things that are shaping us because we do them. So there's lots of examples like that. And technology, I think, fits right in there, where something like social media doesn't just teach you or doesn't allow you to sort of connect with people over a distance, to keep tabs on people's pictures and what they're up to have conversations with friends you wouldn't have met otherwise. It also teaches you implicitly, without you realizing it, what friendship is, what interaction is. Oftentimes, it might lead you towards things like comparison that wouldn't have happened otherwise if you were actually having an in-person relationship. There's all sorts of dynamics that get introduced by virtue of the technology that you're using, that then ends up kind of shaping how you view the world and yourself and everything else. And it's so subtle that eventually, or that you don't really see it happening, but you feel its effects. And this is a lot of those studies about social media have come out recently, have talked about, where it's essentially like, teenagers are saying, I'm more depressed, I'm more anxious than I've ever been. I actually think it's related to social media, but I can't quite get myself to stop because this is where all the action is. And it's just so weird to think that looking at a screen is going to affect me that deeply. It's hard, but of course it is. And so you feel the effects and you wonder, why am I unable to concentrate? Why am I unable to focus on something right now? Like, why is that happening? Why am I sort of anxious and up in the air and feeling unsettled? Well, maybe it's because you're task switching every 5 seconds and you're on your phone in the bathroom and you're like, no matter what you're doing, you're finding some way to also distract yourself or to entertain yourself. That's going to teach you and form you in certain ways that you can't just ignore and think all those consequences go away.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think we see it on individuals. Sometimes it's so subtle that it's hard to see personally. But I think when we look, I've found like history to be really helpful in this way. Like just studying history and thinking about the shaping of societies. And I mean, but before this crazy moment we're in now, right? The last most just significant technological leap was the Industrial Revolution, right? And as a result, like even just the things that society values and that people inside the society values changed, right? There's our modern obsession with efficiency looks a lot more like wishing we were more like computers and phones and the internet than anything else. I mean, and all of this has been born out of technological changes that, again, maybe I guess in one sense they may be hard, or they may be easy to kind of deny on a personal level. Like, oh no, like knowing that means it won't happen to me. But when you see it kind of writ large over generations, the impact of these technologies on people and the way we think, the way we view ourselves is undeniable.
I mean, you want to go really, really deep, and I'll be quick. The kind of modern technology for any given time period in human history is actually how we come to conceive of what it means to be human. So right now, everyone is sort of convinced, it's just kind of in the water, that humans are basically computers. Like our brains are basically computers. They function like computers. They have inputs and outputs and programming, and you get deprogrammed or reprogrammed and all of that stuff. Well, you go back far enough and humans were books. I mean, they were repositories of information. Things were written down, possibly erased. Sometimes they were permanent. Go back further than that into some of the philosophers, and not only humans, but like the whole world was just fire or just water. Or there's a way in which what it meant to be a human, the principle of life, was the thing you had around you that was the most kind of comprehensive and powerful. And so it's crazy to think that our current technology actually affects what we think it means to be a human being. And what that might be doing to us in terms of how we live our lives. How many of us are thinking that if we get new programming, we'll just get new output? How many of us are thinking that we can upload our human beings to a machine one day? Like, all these things are based entirely on the fact that the most recent technology is computing. And what it is in who knows in 100 years or 200 years what it's going to be. But it seems like, given our track record, that's going to affect us at the basic level of what we think it means to be a human. And if you think about how many ways that you and I, as Christians, still think of ourselves basically like computers, and how that affects the ways we think about change and the ways we think about interaction with people, the ways we think about growth, and the ways we think about what it means to kind of be fully alive, you realize how deep that runs. All of that is just kind of not thinking that hard, in a sense, not to be pejorative, but like not really being attentive to the fact that technology really shapes us as much as we shape it.
And it's not only like really interesting to think about, but it's convicting, right? I think there's a lot there. So, okay. So we've raised a lot of questions. we've kind of looked at these dynamics and raised a lot of questions about what this technology is freeing me from. Should I be freed from it? Questions about what this technology is freeing me to. Questions about the cost and trade-offs of any given technology, and is it more helpful than harmful? Even if it is, in what ways is it harmful? We've talked about what we're using the technology for, and we've talked about how we're shaped by technology, and maybe particularly in our hyper. We live in a society where technological advances are changing right faster than any point in history, right? The pace of change is, and because of that, most of us just get overwhelmed by it and are like, you know what? It's easier if I just don't think about it. And you listen to the 5 questions we talked about, we just listed, and it could be easy to say, that's a lot of stuff. You know what? It's easier if I just don't think about it. Where do you start in thinking about technology, and maybe what are some of the biblical truths or principles that you want to bring, that you would encourage people to begin to utilize as they engage with and maybe think more critically about the presence and the presence of technology in their lives and the use of technology?
Yeah, so I would say a good place to start is like not just counting it all as good or bad, like we talked about earlier, because I think about like what are some explicitly good uses of technology that were 100% good, no bad in it. The Ark is a great use of technology that was very obviously God ordained. So it's not like all technology is bad, and the less technology you have in your life, the better. God can and does use technology for good and for his purposes. As far as like specific resources, there's the book Power Failure by Albert Borgman. It's an excellent book that is extremely philosophically written and is very difficult to read. If you do want to read it, I recommend starting on chapter 7 because that's the easiest one to read. It's called Courage and Fortitude. And I think that gives the most like on the ground practical application of the principles in the book. You can also just talk to me because I've read the book a couple times and I love talking about it. There's actually a section from the book that I wanted to read, just a short paragraph, because he goes through...
He threatened to quote it at length.
I thought about just starting at page 1, but it would quickly just be totally off the rails. So this is from chapter 7, Courage and Fortitude, from Power Failure. He's giving just an illustration of like the typical technological lifestyle that a Christian could have. This was in the year 2003 when he wrote this, so some of this might be a little bit dated, but I think the principles and the patterns will still apply. He says, "You come home from work frazzled and spent. You walk into the kitchen and are not surprised that the children have left already and your spouse is not yet home. You find yourself walking to the refrigerator. You take what you like most and put it in the microwave. You stare at the paper on the kitchen table. It's Wednesday. Your favorite TV show is on, followed by a game of the home team. Your pulse quickens a little. The show is good. Your spouse comes home. You exchange a few words. The game is boring. You move to the den to do an overdue memo on the computer. But first you check your email, the latest news. You happen on the ESPN website. They offer you a video game. You play it for a while. Your spouse is going to bed. You decide to call it a day. Has this been an unchristian evening?" And I think that's a worthwhile question to consider. He goes on to explain, like, you've not done any explicit sins in doing this. There were moments of like excitement when you were playing the video game. You enjoyed a very good meal. There was nothing particularly wrong with anything you were doing. And that gets back to, these are matters of prudence, not necessarily right and wrong actions. But then on the next page, he says, and yet all we would have to do to become courageous again is cross the threshold from the TV den to the dining room, or from the home to the realm of communal celebrations. The physical thresholds are in fact low and smooth, but they coincide with moral thresholds that are so high and hard that few of us cross them. So I think that points to how like technology and the technological lifestyle has a way of sneaking up on you and kind of catching you off guard, like, oh wow, I have so much technology around me, even inside me. I broke my collarbone and now there's technology holding my bones together. My bones have healed since then, but still. So I think Power Failure is a great book, great resource to help think about like what exactly are these changes that are happening to me from all this technology. The Gray Areas Conference, I think we're going to post audio from that. That's a great resource as well. There's also a book, another book by Alan Noble called You Are Not Your Own that Brian led a book discussion on, was that 2 years ago now?
At this point, yeah.
Yeah. And that's about our modern culture in Western society of efficiency, and how technology is shaping culture to be more efficient and to value efficiency as the highest good, and what should the Christian response to that be.
Yeah.
That's super helpful resources, man. Super, and I think just some great, again, just some great questions to ask and to begin to dig into that. Brian, as you think about even just the principles, maybe some general biblical principles that shape your engagement with technology, or your thoughts about it, even as you teach about it, where do you go?
Yeah, it's funny talking about technology and biblical principles. On the one hand, I mean, there are some, but they're not quite as on the surface of the text as other topics you might get a hold of. Biblical principles of, say, finances are a little more close to the surface on the text. You kind of put them together grab verses on those topics. And when it comes to technology, it's not quite the same thing. And so you have to do not like a lot of work, but you can't just do the thing where you grab your load up Bible Gateway and search technology and see what comes up and put it together.
Yeah.
That being said, there's plenty of things that are there. And one good example that I kind of go back to a lot is the Tower of Babel, one of the funny things about that story is it starts talking about them taking like bricks and making like bitumen, and you go, oh, that's like, you learn that's technology. That's them going, and it's actually funny because it's waterproof bricks, and we're about a chapter after the flood. So you're kind of like, oh, interesting. Maybe playing some defense. I don't know. These are complicated ancient Near East things. But what you see there is that technology is a great way of trying to be like God in the bad sense. And that was really the big problem in the garden. That's a big problem of the fall. The big problem in all of Scripture, in some sense, is that, or at least one way you could put it, is that we don't like being bounded. We don't like being finite. We don't like, Nietzsche has this great quote where if a God exists, how could I bear not to be that God? And at some level, that's what technology can really help you try and overcome and feel like you really don't have to deal with limits, with things you don't want to deal with. And the Tower of Babel was a way of using technology to try and, make a name for ourselves, it says, and to build ourselves up apart from what God desires for us. And so there is a way that using technology, not, no one here is going like, oh, I'm building the Tower of Babel, but using technology in your own life, I mean more individually, right? Like corporately, sure. But individually, I think none of us are going, oh, that's exactly what I'm doing with my technology, with my phone or something. And nevertheless, the principle that comes from that is, am I doing this to be free from the constraints God's put on me, or to submit myself to them? And there's ways technology can help you submit yourself to them. You still got to be careful. There's still, there's pros and cons to reading the Bible on your phone versus a printed book versus hearing it read, in the synagogue or whatever. There's all ways you need to be attentive to what you're gaining and what potential losses there are. But the question underneath it for your heart is, am I using this to be free from how God made me to be, from the constraints He's put on my life? Am I using this so I don't have to bear with not being God? Or is this technology a means of me of submitting to God, giving Him glory whether I eat or drink, walking through my life as someone who knows that He is God and I am not, and leveraging the dominion that human beings have achieved as part of their mandate in Genesis 1 and 2 to be better at that in my own life? So you can see how that is kind of a right or wrong question. That is a moral question. If you're using technology to essentially look at God and say, I don't want to do it your way and I don't have to. I can do it my way and I can do it faster without these constraints on me. Well, that's a bad thing. That's a sin. But even if you're taking technology and saying, okay, I don't want to do that. I want to submit to God in my technology use. I want to be a human being the way He's made me to be. And even in doing that, you still have the pros and cons. You still have to be wise about it. But there is a moral issue underneath it. The one other thing I'd add is that a different way of looking at that same issue is just the fact that productivity and efficiency, to talk about Alan Noble, it's a phenomenal book. Efficiency is a really cruel master. It's a cruel idol. And when you devote yourself to the pursuit of getting kind of as much friction out of your life and therefore as much accomplished, quote unquote, as you can, you end up doing that thing where you're not accomplishing things for any actual purpose. The purpose is in the accomplishment itself. And that means you're on a hamster wheel and you run faster and faster. And I think a lot of people, if you didn't resonate with what I said earlier about Babel and things, I get that, it's a little more theoretical. I think you might resonate with feeling like you're constantly at work using technology to free yourself of things and never feel like you're getting anywhere. You just feel more tired. And a lot of that is just that same Babel impulse to go, well, it's good for me to free myself of constraints. I'll just keep doing that as often as the opportunity is presented, do whatever kind of comes naturally or my desires lead me to do. And in so doing, I never get any peace or satisfaction or rest. I just keep like removing obstacles to what? Well, you end up with a life without purpose. To borrow Alan Noble's phrase, entirely belongs to you. It is, you own your own life. You belong to yourself, but there's no purpose, no meaning, no joy. And you're just so tired and anxious and exhausted. And you never think about how much technology is a part of that. And it doesn't mean becoming Amish, but reevaluating how and why you're using the technology that's in your life, and maybe even constraining some of it, because almost all of us just let it kind of go, might lead to a surprising amount of more friction and yet more rest, and more kind of stability in your own kind of heart and soul. And so I think there's something there for people who could to really sink your teeth into, even if that first part wasn't as resonant.
Man, so I think that is really helpful. It's a, and I think you're also hitting on the fact that in a lot of ways, there's a part of us that wants to get our heads, or I want to get my hands all the way around it, right? Like how do we, and which is also a part of just trying to be God. The reality is, like, most of us just need to take a first step. Like we just need to think about it at all, like evaluate it at all. And maybe we're like hyper vigilant at evaluating certain forms of technology, but we don't think at all about utilizing others, right? And just to even begin to ask this question, I mean, it makes me think of even just a simple exhortation like Colossians 3, right? To set your minds on the things that are above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God, to put to death what's earthly in you, to not set our minds on the things of earth, to not just get carried away, but to be intentionally engaged, asking eternal, ethical, spiritual questions of every aspect of life and every tool we engage with, as we, yeah. So here's what I want to do. We're far enough into this. I want to, I really want to, like, I don't know, flesh this out a bit and like have some fun, like just talking about these questions as they apply to different forms of modern technology, but we don't have time. So we're going to record another one. We're going to record a second version of this. And actually maybe in between them, what we'll do is post the social media session from the Gray Areas Conference that gives some principles, kind of I think about it specifically in regards to social media. We can reflect on that, but then maybe we can, it'd be easy to fill a whole podcast about like, okay, how do these principles apply to social media? But I'd love to like hit some different and diverse areas so that we can, in order to stimulate us as a church to think, more deeply, more critically, maybe even just take some of those first steps of looking again at some of the technologies that we take for granted, and asking some of these important questions into that. So, how's that sound?
That sounds great.
All right. Brian gives me a thumbs up. So
sorry, it's a podcast. I forgot.
Actually, I was encouraged. All right, so we'll leave it here for now. This is super stimulating. I mean, yeah, we could talk about this for hours and hours. I think there's lots of other resources. Maybe we'll talk about some other resources the next time we get together. But we'll leave it there for now. So thanks, Adam.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brian.
Yep.
Appreciate it. Thank you all for listening. We love you, and we'll see you on Sunday.